Immigration, what's your status?
U.S. citizen, born here.
Your accent suggests otherwise.
My accent is from speaking Spanish at home.
Hashtag ICE agents illegally detain U.S. citizen because of his accent, wins $12 million settlement. Agent Derek Holt, federal badge number 7741 of the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Field Office in San Marcos, Texas, was conducting what his incident report would later describe as a routine enforcement presence operation in the parking lot of a Home Depot on Westfield Boulevard on a Saturday morning when he spotted Rafael Moreno, a 34-year-old man in work clothes, loading lumber into the bed of a white pickup truck while talking on his phone in Spanish. Holt watched him for 90 seconds from the unmarked government SUV parked at the lot entrance. He watched him finish the phone call, stack 3 planks of wood, check a handwritten list on the tailgate, and walk back toward the store entrance for a second load. Holt stepped out of the SUV. His partner, Agent Sandra Pruitt, stepped out from the passenger side. They crossed the parking lot and intercepted Moreno at the store entrance, told him they were ICE agents conducting an immigration enforcement operation, and demanded proof of citizenship. When Moreno told them in English, accented English, the specific English of someone who grew up speaking Spanish at home and learned English in the Texas public school system, that he was a United States citizen born in San Marcos, Texas, at the hospital 4 miles from where they were standing, Holt told him that his accent indicated he was likely not a native-born citizen and that the claim required verification. When Moreno told him he did not carry his birth certificate to the hardware store on Saturday mornings and produced his Texas driver's license, Holt told him that driver's licenses were issued to undocumented individuals in some states and that Texas had documented cases of fraudulent license issuance and that the license alone was insufficient verification. When Moreno told him that he paid taxes in this county, owned the house he had lived in for 9 years, had graduated from San Marcos High School in 2008 and from Texas State University in 2012, and that his father had been a San Marcos city councilman for 11 years, Holt told him that none of those claims were verifiable in the field and that he was being detained for immigration processing. He was placed in the back of the government SUV in handcuffs at 10:17 in the morning, while his lumber sat in the bed of his truck in the Home Depot parking lot, and his phone, which contained his wife's contact number and the number of every person who could have confirmed his citizenship in under 4 minutes, was placed in an evidence bag and driven away with him. What Holt didn't know was that Rafael Moreno had indeed been born at San Marcos Regional Hospital on March 4, 1990, that his birth certificate was filed with the state of Texas and had been since the day of his birth, that his social security number had been active since he was issued one as an infant, that his voter registration had been current since his 18th birthday, that he had filed federal tax returns for 12 consecutive years, that his father Roberto Moreno had served on the San Marcos City Council from 2001 to 2012, and was a recognized figure in the county whose name appeared on 3 public buildings, and that the San Marcos County Sheriff, a man named David Okafor who had known Rafael Moreno since he was 11 years old and had attended his college graduation, was going to receive a phone call from Moreno's wife within 20 minutes of the detention that would bring him to the ICE processing facility with a birth certificate, a voter registration card, a tax return, and an expression that the facility's intake officer would later describe in his written statement as the most controlled fury he had encountered in 14 years of working in federal detention. Before we go further, what city or country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments right now. We love seeing where our community is watching from. If you believe speaking Spanish in a Home Depot parking lot while being a United States citizen born in this country should never produce handcuffs and an immigration processing facility, then like this video and subscribe. Because what Agent Derek Holt started in that parking lot on a Saturday morning ended with a $12 million settlement, a congressional hearing, and a policy overhaul that extended to every ICE field office in the state. Rafael Moreno had been born at San Marcos Regional Hospital on a Tuesday morning in March of 1990. His mother, Elena, had been in labor for 14 hours. His father, Roberto, had been in the waiting room reading a Texas monthly magazine and was paged to the delivery room at 6:47 in the morning. He had held his son for the first time at 6:52. He had been a San Marcos City Council member for 1 year at that point and would serve for 10 more. The birth certificate filed that day with the state of Texas in the county of Hays, at the hospital on Wonderworld Drive, was the document that established every legal fact about Rafael Moreno that the subsequent 34 years had confirmed, extended, and built upon. Rafael had attended Mendez Elementary, Miller Middle School, and San Marcos High School. He had played trumpet in the high school band for 3 years, had been on the debate team for 2, and had graduated in 2008 with a 3.4 grade point average. He had attended Texas State University on a partial academic scholarship and had graduated in 2012 with a degree in construction management, the degree that had produced the career that had produced the Saturday morning lumber purchase that had produced the encounter in the parking lot. He ran a small residential construction company with 4 employees, all of them legal residents and 2 of them United States citizens. He had been married to his wife Isabel for 6 years. They had a 4-year-old daughter named Sophia who had also been born at San Marcos Regional Hospital and whose birth certificate was filed in the same county office as her father's. He spoke Spanish at home because his mother had insisted on it, not from any lack of English but from the specific cultural conviction that language was patrimony and that her grandchildren would speak to her in the language she had spoken to her own grandmother. He spoke English at work, at the hardware store, at Sophia's pediatric appointments, at the city council meetings he occasionally attended in his father's memory, and in every other context that the 34 years of being a Texan had produced. He had never been asked to prove he was American before the Saturday morning in the Home Depot parking lot. He had never needed to be. Agent Derek Holt had been with the ICE San Marcos field office for 6 years. His personnel file contained 14 complaints. 9 from Latino individuals who had been detained, questioned, or subjected to extended identification demands in circumstances that the complaints characterized as based on appearance and language rather than any behavioral indicator of immigration status. 3 of those complaints had been filed by United States citizens. All 14 had been reviewed and closed by the field office's supervisory structure under a broad enforcement discretion standard that classified Holt's stops as consistent with active enforcement operations and within the operational parameters of the field office's community presence mandate. Nobody had examined what percentage of Holt's enforcement contacts in the Westfield Boulevard corridor involved individuals who were speaking Spanish at the time of contact. Nobody had been required to. The enforcement rationale Holt articulated in his incident report for the Moreno detention was accent-based inference, a theory that an individual's manner of speaking English indicated non-native origin, which in turn indicated possible undocumented status. This theory did not appear in any ICE enforcement protocol document. It did not appear in any federal statute. It did not appear in any judicial decision that had survived appellate review. It appeared in Holt's incident report as the primary basis for the stop of a man who had been born in this county and had lived in it for 34 years and was buying lumber on a Saturday morning to repair a fence at his house 4 miles away. Pruitt had been Holt's partner for 8 months. She had 3 complaints in her file, all from Latino individuals, all closed. She had raised no objection to the Moreno stop. She would later state in her internal affairs interview that she had deferred to Holt's operational judgment because he had 6 years of experience to her too, and because the field office's culture had not produced an environment in which questioning a senior agent's enforcement decision during an active operation was understood as an available option. That statement would be cited in the congressional hearing as one of the most significant institutional failure disclosures produced by the investigation. Moreno was placed in the government SUV at 10:17. His phone was taken at 10:18. He was driven to the ICE processing facility on Commerce Road, a 40-minute drive, during which he repeated the same information he had provided in the parking lot. Born in San Marcos, Texas State graduate, construction company owner, father of former city councilman, and received no response from either agent in the front seats. He was processed at 11:04. His personal property was logged. His phone went into a bag. He was assigned a holding cell and told that processing would determine next steps. He asked for a phone call. He was told he would receive one when processing was complete. He asked how long processing would take. He was told it varied. He sat in the holding cell and thought about his lumber in the Home Depot parking lot, and his wife Isabel, who was expecting him home by noon, and his daughter Sophia, who had been promised a trip to the splash pad that afternoon and the fence he was supposed to be repairing this weekend and the birth certificate in the filing cabinet in his home office that would have ended this in the parking lot in. For minutes if he had thought to bring it to buy lumber on a Saturday morning. Isabel called his phone at 10:51. The call went to the evidence bag. She called again at 11:03, and at 11:14, and at 11:22. By 11:30 she had called 9 times and had driven to the Home Depot parking lot where she found his truck with the lumber in the bed and no Raphael. And she stood in the Home Depot parking lot on a Saturday morning and called the San Marcos County Sheriff. David Okafor answered on the second ring. Sheriff David Okafor had known Rafael Moreno since 1991, when Roberto Moreno had brought his 1-year-old son to a county public safety event and Okafor, then a deputy, had held the baby briefly while Roberto signed an attendance sheet. He had watched Rafael grow up the way people watch the children of colleagues grow up, at county events, at school functions his department partnered with, at Roberto's retirement dinner in 2012, at Rafael's wedding in 2018 where Okafor had sat at the family table because Roberto had insisted. He had a photograph on his office wall of himself and Roberto from 2006 and a photograph on his desk of himself and Rafael from the 2018 wedding. He arrived at the ICE processing facility on Commerce Road at 12:14. He was in his uniform. His badge was visible. He was carrying a manila folder containing Rafael Moreno's birth certificate, his social security card, his voter registration confirmation, his most recent federal tax return, and a printout of his Texas State University diploma from the university's online verification system. He had assembled the folder in his car using documents Isabel had photographed and sent to him while he drove. The intake officer at the Commerce Road facility looked at the sheriff's badge and the manila folder and called his supervisor. The supervisor looked at the sheriff's badge and the manila folder and called Holt. Holt came to the intake desk at 12:31. He looked at the birth certificate. He looked at the social security card. He looked at the voter registration. He looked at the tax return. He looked at the university diploma verification. He looked at the San Marcos County Sheriff standing on the other side of the intake desk with the expression of a man who had known Rafael Moreno's father for 20 years and was managing, with visible and deliberate effort, the specific quality of fury that comes from looking at documentation that should have been unnecessary and knowing that the only reason it was assembled in a manila folder in a federal facility was that someone had heard an accent and drawn a conclusion. Holt said, "The documentation appears to verify citizenship." Okafor said, "The documentation appears to verify what Mr. Moreno told your agent in the parking lot 2 hours ago." Holt said nothing. "I want him out in 5 minutes. Okafor said, "and I want every item of his personal property returned to him in the condition it was in when it was taken. And I want the name of your field office supervisor because I am calling that person from this parking lot before I drive Rafael home." Moreno was released at 12:38. He had been in the facility for 1 hour and 34 minutes. His phone was returned to him with 41 missed calls. 9 from Isabel, the rest from family members Isabel had contacted after reaching the sheriff. He stood in the Commerce Road parking lot in his work clothes and looked at the sheriff's vehicle and the manila folder that Okafor was holding and the birth certificate on top that had been filed at the state of Texas 34 years ago, and that should have made everything that happened today impossible. He called Isabel. She answered before the first ring completed. "I'm out," he said. She said his name twice. Then she said Sophia was asking where he was. "Tell her the splash pad is still happening," he said. "I'll be home in 40 minutes. He looked at the facility behind him. He looked at the sheriff. "Thank you," he said. Okafor said, "Don't thank me. I'm sorry this happened. Now let's make sure it doesn't happen to the next person who doesn't have a sheriff who can drive over." That sentence, spoken in a Commerce Road parking lot at 12:39 on a Saturday afternoon, became the organizing principle of everything that followed. Attorney Clara Hargrove filed the federal civil rights lawsuit 31 days after the Commerce Road detention. The complaint sought $12 million and named Holt and Pruitt individually, the IC San Marcos field office institutionally, and the federal government for the documented failure to address 14 complaints over 6 years, and for the operational use of accent-based inference as an enforcement rationale in the absence of any legal framework that supported it. The complaint cited 3 prior detentions of United States citizens in Holt's complaint history. It cited the field office's broad enforcement discretion standard as a structural failure that had been applied to close complaints without examining whether the underlying enforcement rationale had any legal basis. It cited Pruitt's internal affairs statement about the field office culture as evidence of an institutional environment that had normalized enforcement decisions that did not survive legal scrutiny. And it cited the 41 missed calls on Moreno's returned phone as a documentation of the human cost of an hour and 34 minutes of detention that the available documentation would have prevented in under 4 minutes in the parking lot. The congressional hearing was convened 11 weeks after the complaint was filed by the House Judiciary Committee's Subcommittee on Immigration Enforcement Oversight. Moreno testified. Okafor testified. Pruitt's internal affairs statement was read into the record. The field office's 14 complaint history was presented with the 3 United States citizen detentions highlighted. The accent-based inference rationale from Holt's incident report was displayed on a screen behind the subcommittee chair, and the chair asked the ICE field office director to identify the federal statute, enforcement protocol, or judicial decision that supported it. The director could not identify one. The exchange lasted 4 minutes and was viewed 18 million times. The federal government settled for the full $12 million 14 months after the complaint was filed. The settlement required the immediate removal of accent-based inference from any ICE enforcement rationale documentation nationwide. It required a revised citizenship verification protocol that mandated field agents to attempt phone-based verification through 3 independent databases before initiating a detention for suspected undocumented status. It required mandatory constitutional law training for all ICE field agents covering the 4th and 14th Amendment standards applicable to citizenship verification stops. It required an independent audit of all detentions made by the San Marcos field office over the previous 5 years, sorted by primary enforcement rationale and citizenship status of the detained individual. And it required the establishment of a field office complaint review process that included external legal review of enforcement rationale for any complaint alleging citizenship-based wrongful detention, a process that would have examined Holt's accent-based rationale after complaint number 1, rather than allowing it to persist through complaint number 14. The audit found that the San Marcos field office had detained 47 United States citizens over 5 years in stops, where the primary enforcement rationale did not include any behavioral indicator of undocumented status. Holt's cases accounted for 11 of the 47. 8 additional agents showed similar patterns. 6 were terminated. 2 were placed on supervised retraining. The field office supervisor who had signed off on 14 complaint closures without external legal review of the enforcement rationale resigned before the audit was complete. Holt was terminated and faced federal civil rights charges for the unlawful detention. Pruitt received a 30-day suspension and mandatory retraining. The distinction in their outcomes reflected the investigation's finding on decision-making authority, and the institutional culture finding that Pruitt's statement had produced, which required the field office to address the environment that had made silence during an unlawful enforcement action feel like the available option. Rafael Moreno took Sofia to the splash pad on the Saturday afternoon of the detention. They arrived late. It was almost 3 by the time they got there. But the splash pad was still running and Sofia had not noticed the time, and the afternoon was still warm and the lumber was still in his truck for the fence repair that happened the following weekend. He stood at the edge of the splash pad and watched his daughter run through the water jets and thought about the birth certificate in the filing cabinet at home that he had never needed to bring anywhere before, and the accent that his mother had given him along with the language she had insisted he keep, and the 41 missed calls on a phone that had been in an evidence bag for an hour and a half. He used $4 million of his settlement to establish the Moreno Foundation for Citizenship Rights, which provided legal support and rapid documentation assistance to United States citizens detained in immigration enforcement actions, a program specifically designed to address the problem that Okafor had identified in the Commerce Road parking lot. The next person who doesn't have a sheriff who can drive over. In its first 2 years, the foundation assisted over 230 people. Many of them had been in holding cells with phones in evidence bags and no one who knew which folder to assemble and which parking lot to drive to. His father Roberto, who had died in 2019 and had not lived to see what happened in the Home Depot parking lot, had a public building in San Marcos named after him. Rafael drove past it every day on the way to his job sites. He still spoke Spanish on the phone while loading lumber. He still bought his materials at the Home Depot on Westfield Boulevard. He still had an accent that his mother had given him along with everything else she had given him that he had never once considered explaining or defending until a Saturday morning when someone decided the accent was a question that required an answer. It was not a question. It never was. It was a voice. His voice. In his language. In his county. In his country. 34 years of documents said so. They always had. The lesson is in a Home Depot parking lot on a Saturday morning. A man was buying lumber to fix his fence. He spoke Spanish on his phone while he loaded it. An agent watched him for 90 seconds and decided the language indicated a status that 34 years of documentation contradicted completely. He was placed in handcuffs at 10:17. His phone went into an evidence bag. His wife called 41 times. A sheriff assembled a manila folder in his car. A birth certificate that had been filed with the state of Texas in 1990 was carried into a federal facility at 12:14 and placed on an intake desk in front of an agent who had written accent-based inference in an incident report and called it enforcement rationale. 14 complaints. 6 years. 9 Latino individuals. 3 United States citizens. 0 external legal reviews of the enforcement rationale. Until a congressional subcommittee asked for the statute that supported accent-based inference and the field office director could not name one in 4 minutes of silence that 18 million people watched. $12 million. 6 agents terminated. 47 United States citizens identified in the audit. 1 enforcement rationale removed from every ICE field office in the country. 230 people assisted by a foundation built from a settlement funded by a man who should have been home fixing his fence by noon. It should not require a county sheriff with a manila folder to establish that a birth certificate filed in 1990 means the person it names is a citizen. It keeps requiring it because the accent-based inference keeps being written into incident reports and the complaint closures keep happening without external legal review and the enforcement. Discretion standards keep being broad enough to cover rationales that cannot survive 4 minutes of congressional questioning until the folder is assembled in a car and carried across a parking lot and laid on an intake desk and a man goes home to take his daughter to the splash pad 2 hours late. If you believe speaking Spanish in a hardware store parking lot should never be the beginning of an hour and 34 minutes in a federal holding cell, share this story with everyone who needs to understand what 47 United States citizens looks like when an audit finally puts them in a document that someone is required to read. What specific mandatory verification protocols would prevent accent-based detention rationales from producing the next 47 before an audit is required to find them? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you believe $12 million is not the ceiling, it is the floor of what accountability should cost when 14 complaints were closed without external legal review and 3 prior United States citizen detentions followed the same rationale and an accent was written into an incident report as enforcement basis for 34 years of documented citizenship. Subscribe. Because we are not finished until the external legal review that should have happened after complaint number 1 is the requirement and not the settlement provision.